You know, when the economy starts to tank, our gut reaction is to hunker down, right? Just play it safe, hold on to what you've got, and wait for the storm to pass. But what if that's the absolute worst thing you could do? What if the very best time to build something new, something huge, isn't when things are booming, but when they're completely falling apart? I mean, think about it. If I asked you, when is the absolute worst time to start a company? Most of us, myself included, would probably say, during a recession, obviously. It just feels like common sense. Money's tight, customers aren't spending, everything is uncertain. It sounds like a total recipe for disaster. But is it really? Well, get ready for this, because that common sense might be dead wrong. A study by the Kauffman Foundation found something that just blew my mind. Over half, more than 50% of the companies on the 2009 Fortune 500 list were launched during a recession or a bear market. Just let that sink in for a second. More than half of the biggest companies in the country were born during the worst economic times. Okay, so that can't just be a coincidence, right? There has to be some powerful economic force at work here. Something that explains how these moments of total crisis can actually create the most innovative and successful companies. So that brings us to the real question. How on earth can chaos be a catalyst for creation? Well, the answer has a name, and it sounds pretty intense. It's a concept called creative destruction. This is the theory, the framework that helps us understand this whole trend. You can think of it as the engine that's constantly powering this cycle of failure and rebirth in our economy. And to get the theory, we've got to meet the guy who came up with it, Joseph Schumpeter. He was an Austrian economist back in the early 20th century, but he wasn't your typical stuffy academic. People called him the prophet of innovation because he saw the economy not as some static machine, but as this living, breathing, constantly evolving thing. And at the absolute core of his thinking was this big idea. Schumpeter called creative destruction a constant process of industrial mutation. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying the economy is always changing. But here's the key. It's not a gentle, slow evolution. He saw it more like a powerful storm that relentlessly tears down the old to make room for the new. So how does this storm actually work? Well, you can think of it in 3 steps. First, some kind of new innovation pops up, a new piece of tech, a totally different way of doing business. Second, that new thing completely shakes up the old way of doing things, causing established companies and even entire industries to start falling apart. And finally, a whole new order is created, where the innovators who started the storm rise up and become the new market leaders. All right, so that's the theory. But how does this actually look in the real world? Let's take a look at a couple of companies you definitely know, companies that were literally born from the ashes of their own failures. Let's start with Instagram. But it didn't start as Instagram. No, it began its life as an app called Bourbon. And frankly, it was a mess. A really clunky, complicated app for checking into places. But the founders noticed something interesting. While most people ignored all the complicated features, they absolutely loved one little part of it, sharing photos. And that's when they made a really tough but totally brilliant decision. They basically destroyed their own product. They took Bourbon and stripped away everything that wasn't working, all the failure, all the noise, and they focused only on that one thing people loved. The result? Instagram, an app so simple and so perfect that it was bought by Facebook for $1 billion in just 18 months. That is creative destruction in a nutshell. And then you've got Slack. Now this one's even crazier. It actually started as a side project inside a video game company that was failing. The company was called Tiny Speck, and their game Glitch was a total flop. It just never took off. But here's the thing. To build the game, the team had created this amazing internal chat tool so they could all communicate and work together. Pretty soon they realized the game was a dead end. But that little tool they built to help them manage their own failure, that was the real product. So they pivoted. They took that internal tool, polished it up, and launched it as Slack. And it just exploded. We're talking a valuation of over $7 billion in just 5 years. They literally found their fortune inside their own failure. So what do these stories really show us? Well, they reveal this incredibly powerful truth. They teach us a completely new way to look at problems, a new way to think about failure. Instead of seeing them as the end of the road, we can start to see them as the beginning of one. The legendary investor Vinod Khosla just nails it with this quote: "The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity." A crisis, a recession, a failed product, these things aren't just roadblocks. They're actually opportunities in disguise, just waiting for somebody to come along and solve them. But why, though? Why are downturns so good at creating these chances? Well, there are a few key reasons. First, a crisis creates brand new, urgent problems that need solutions, like yesterday. A downturn also exposes all the old, bloated, inefficient ways of doing business that just can't cut it anymore. At the same time, there's suddenly way less competition for the best people and for resources. And maybe the most important thing of all, failure becomes one heck of a teacher. So, the bottom line is this. A recession is basically a giant reset button for the economy. It's not just about destruction. It's about clearing out all the old stuff that's not working to allow new, stronger ideas to grow. It clears the way for whatever comes next. And that forces us to look ahead, doesn't it? Because this cycle isn't some old thing from a history book. It's happening right now, and it's going to keep happening. So what does the future of all this creative destruction actually look like? We have to remember this whole process never, ever stops. The big, innovative companies of today, the ones who disrupted the last generation, they often become the big, slow-moving targets for the next generation of innovators. Absolutely no one is safe from the cycle. It really is the engine of progress. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. As new technologies like AI are shaking up our entire world, disrupting everything we know, what old giants are about to fall? And maybe more importantly, what brand new giants are about to rise up from the rubble to take their place?